Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Sara Price. And Sara, I met you on somebody's island, and you did not actually think you had known me before. And I didn't bring you a crate of papaya, but we did have a really good time.
We had an amazing time.
So I met Sara on Necker Island. Gosh, that was more than a year ago now, isn't it?
No, can you believe it?
And Sara is the founder of Actually, and you can find her at actually.world or on linkedin.com/in/Sara, Sara-Price. She's also the co-founder of what field?
Pagefield.
And I'm so focused on Actually, and I think it's so cool. And I was surfing your website before this, and you know, I think you and I have a lot of things that we do that cross over quite a bit, and I think that you go into places that I don't, and perhaps the same with me. But I think that there's a lot to talk about and a lot that we probably agree on, and I think the nuances of our different views there could be something fun.
Absolutely. There. I think fundamentally, John, you and I are both about trying to help people to lead better, communicate better, and have a bigger impact. So
there you go. Well, you know, I came up with an equation, and I've always been the soft skills guy, so that's kind of a big deal for me. You know, always was jealous of the hard skills people, but here's my equation, Sara, and that maybe we can start with this as a place to jump off from into what you know, your points of view and things. I came up with the equation L equals F and then C in parentheses. And that means L is a function of C. And I say leadership is a function of communication. And I just feel like anything that people want to do out in the world that is leadership is going to involve other people. You know, you can lead yourself, and that's awesome, but it gets not that much done.
Yeah.
That's where it stops.
Yeah. I believe that there are 4 groups of skills that leaders need, and great communications is essential. I would add to that emotional intelligence. Without emotional intelligence, it's impossible to lead people, to inspire people, to bring people on that journey with you. Yeah. And I think there's a really big and important piece for me around values and having a kind of values-based approach to your leadership.
Yes.
And then there's a kind of deep understanding of the humanity and connection, the importance of humanity and connection. And if you've got those 4 pieces, then you can be a great leader. But if you don't have even one of them, then your leadership will be very challenging.
Yes. Yeah. Well, then it's time to start working on those things, right?
Absolutely.
And I think you'd probably agree with me that great leaders, I mean, some people may get a leg up in their early years or may have some assistance from whatever, but I don't think leaders are born. I think leaders are made. And I think that they're all skills that can be learned and practiced, and people can get better. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I say this to my clients all the time when they come to me. I do a lot of training in communications, and a lot of leaders in particular, when they first come to see me, they're very nervous. They're very reticent. They think that there is a kind of dark art or a specific talent that they don't have. And one of the very first things that I do with them is get them to understand that communications is just a skill like any other skill, and it can be learned just like any other skill can be learned. So it's like playing the piano. Even if you have some innate talent at it, you still have to learn, you still have to practice, and you can always improve on that basic skill. And without it, leadership is impossible.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you see as being some of the more common challenges? And let's talk about a subset of people who are already good at leadership. They've already got proof that they're pretty good at that. They're already fairly high up in their organization or whatever they're doing. What are some of the big things that you see right off the bat?
I think some of the biggest challenges that that I'm seeing, particularly at the moment, there's there are a lot of false choices that people are presented with as leaders. So a lot of leaders feel like they have to make a choice between kind of old paradigm style of leadership and new paradigm style, that they have to be either collaborative or directive, that they have to be
Mm,
either, those kind of masculine traits in
yeah.
inverted commas or
Um,
feminine traits.
mm,
And we set up all of these false choices for leaders, whereas the reality is the most important characteristic of leadership right now, particularly in the sort of current environment, is the ability to adapt and flex to what the
mm,
world throws at you. And what I see a lot with leaders, particularly those who've never had any specific leadership training or mentoring, is
yeah.
they feel like they have to be one thing
Mm.
and only that thing. So I see a lot of that. I see a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of command and control leadership. Do
Okay,
you know what I mean?
everybody, I want you to sign into Zoom and aim your camera at your
Yeah,
keyboard, and
exactly,
I'm going to watch you all work, right? Yeah.
exactly.
That's
And
not going
this kind of
to.
and I think part of it is because, and I'd love to know what your take on this is. I think a lot of people, they work their way up the career ladder by being very good at what they do. So, for
Yes.
example, I've done 25 years in communications and PR, and I ended up on the board of one of the world's biggest PR agencies because I was good at communications and PR. But nowhere along the line did anyone give me management training or leadership
Right.
training.
Right.
So when you get to the top of the career ladder, you're still most comfortable in your discipline, communications and PR for me. So the tendency to try and control and micromanage what everybody else is doing comes from, that's where you're most comfortable, is doing that. And
Yeah.
letting go of that and stepping up into a leadership position is quite a big leap and quite difficult for people who've had no encouragement, no training, no mentoring in that. Makes sense?
Well, yeah, oh, absolutely, Sarah. I mean, I think this is one of the biggest issues, and I think that I mean, there's so much in what you just said. The first thing is there's that there's that thing called the Peter principle, I think is what they call it, where people rise to their highest level of incompetence, which is really kind of a mean way to say it. Like, what happens really is what you just said. Someone's very good at what they do, and
Mm,
then they keep getting more and more people to manage. Nobody ever tells them or shows them or trains them in how to manage people. They're just good at what they do and what these other people do. But if you're really good at something, you want to do it. And
mm,
it's very hard not to do it if somebody around you is not doing it as well as you. But that's the absolute opposite thing that
mm,
people need to do as they go up in leadership,
mm,
right?
mm.
So,
Yeah.
absolutely, the deck is stacked in that instance, and
Mm,
people shouldn't feel bad about getting. I mean, they went to school to get trained to do what they do typically, and then they think they should be able to manage people just magically or something. That's
exactly.
so
I
that
I
doesn't
say
work.
exactly, and I say to people that come to me all the time, I actually believe that a commitment to learning, a commitment to ongoing development is another sign of great leadership, because poor leaders are concerned about how they will appear. They think,
Mm.
"Oh, if I go and do training, if I go and do some development work, if I go to this workshop, people will think that I don't know what I'm doing," as opposed to, actually, people will think that you're committed to getting better and better at what you do.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe that just by showing up for the training, just by going to the workshop, just by doing the hard graft of developing your skills, you are demonstrating good leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% agree. The people that I work with that get the most from what I offer are
Mm,
the people who are already the best, because the reason they're the best is the reason they get the most from what I offer, because they're always hungry for that next level.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I think of communication like golf or surfing, or there's a whole bunch of other things like that where you could always imagine being better.
Yeah.
Even if you're really good, you could always imagine being better. We'll just keep imagining that and keep going, right?
Exactly. But also things change and evolve. What
Mm,
was acceptable, what worked in communications terms 5 years ago doesn't work anymore. And
yeah.
unless you are continually refreshing and renewing your skills and your knowledge and your understanding, you will
Yeah.
be out of date very, very quickly. So, having a really good trainer, a really good mentor, a really good leadership coach that's going to challenge you and encourage you to keep your knowledge up to date, I think is probably one of the best investments that leaders can make.
I think you're right. And, it ties back to something you said earlier, uh, which made me think about the fact that I was talking with the woman who ran Intuit,
Mm,
their
mm,
HR forever.
mm,
And she said something that I thought was just so brilliant and profound and so simple. We were talking about one of the folks on her team who is stepping up into just the next level of leadership, which is basically the top level there. And she said, "Well, John, people want to know their leaders."
yes. Yeah.
And I mean, it's pretty clear, but it's so people, and as a leader, what that means, I think, is much more emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
a lot more stories about what matters to you and
Mm,
how you learned them and where you came from and
mm,
why you care about this and that.
mm,
And as you share those things,
mm.
I think it dramatically amplifies your leadership success.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it
I think
for
there's a
a
step
lot of
even
leaders,
before that.
say it again.
I said, I think there's a step even before that, which is to be present. There's a very old school of leadership that you sort of sit in an ivory tower and you hand down your instructions like diktats to everybody below you, and you maintain this kind of aura of mystery and intrigue. But in fact, I think particularly now, the better leaders, the best leaders are those who are present, not just
Yeah.
for their external audiences, for clients and media, etc., but
Yeah.
internally as well. And right at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, when we were seeing huge runs on basic products in all the big supermarkets, and I'm sure it was the same over there.
Yes.
There's a guy called Mike Coupe, who's the chief executive of Sainsbury's, which is one of our big
Yeah.
supermarket chains in the UK.
Yeah.
And he modeled and exemplified this exact thing. So first of all the emails that went out to customers explaining what the situation was and what they were doing to try and address it, they all came directly from him.
That's
He
cool.
was the person who was talking to the media. He was the guy that was on the news. He was the guy that was out there doing the rounds of interviews and meeting with government and policymakers. But also, and most importantly in a way, he was the guy going into the stores and speaking to staff. He was the guy holding the meetings in their headquarters and saying, right,
Right.
guys, this is what we're going to do. I know this is tough. I know this is difficult. I know that all of you are worried and concerned and quite possibly afraid for what's going to happen. I want you to know that I'm here and this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And just by being present, as well as everything you've said, telling stories, allowing people the opportunity to get to know you, but simply by being present and being, what's the word I'm looking for, accessible in a way,
Yeah. Yeah.
you demonstrate an openness that I think is absolutely integral to good leadership now.
Yeah.
Might not have been 10 years ago, but I think it's essential now.
Well, Sarah, tell me what you think of this, because when I get to this, crossroads in my mind around
Mm,
leadership, it seems to me like that kind of the first kind of leadership you described, is sitting in the
mm,
tower and handing out diktats and, you
mm,
know, not being present and,
mm,
all that. That seems to me to be fundamentally a type of leadership based in insecurity. And I
mm,
don't think that leadership was ever the best kind of leadership. I think people maybe got away with it and people maybe still get away with it. But
mm,
I don't think that that is the most successful and
mm,
productive kind of leadership ever. I
mm,
don't, even back in the days of kingdoms and, I mean, I just think there were better rulers and worse rulers even back then. And
mm,
that fundamental approach is just an insecure approach
mm.
that is fear-based and doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible, and I really like that. I don't like it, but I really resonate with that idea that it's fear based. I wonder as well, though, whether it's not necessarily always a reflection of insecurity. It may well be for a lot of them, but irrespective of what's going on for them personally, certainly that kind of leadership nowadays looks like insecurity.
Yeah.
um,
Well,
and
there you
and
go.
whether it actually is or not is almost a byproduct, is almost less relevant than the fact that it looks like insecurity. And as a
Yes.
leader, you can't afford to look like you are insecure in your position. That's not a great place to stand. You want to
Yeah.
be standing fully in your power, and allowing people the opportunity to connect with you.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. And that brings up something that I was just talking about with a group last night, and that it comes up a lot, which is the whole idea of being vulnerable as a
Mm,
leader. Now, you can't look insecure.
mm.
So how does vulnerability fit into the picture for you, Sarah?
It's a really interesting question, and this has come up a lot again in the context of the current crisis.
Yeah, just for anybody listening who doesn't know, we're recording this in October of 2020. So we're in the midst of what seems like a second wave or third
Yeah,
wave of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. And things are definitely still globally massively disrupted.
exactly. It's hairy, is how I would put it. It's a pretty
Yeah.
hairy situation right now.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot of debate and discussion about emotional openness and vulnerability in leadership, and what does that mean, and what does it look like, and where are the boundaries of that? And I believe that emotional intelligence is the kind of key here. As a leader, I think your most important job is particularly in a crisis situation, is to reassure people, to inspire confidence, and to encourage trust. Right, that's essentially your job. Um, and emotional intelligence suggests the ability to understand and empathize with the emotions of those people around you. There's a degree of openness so that you can build connection. So I think vulnerability, and Brené Brown does some fantastic work on this. Vulnerability is the linchpin of being able to create connection. But where I think we have to get really clear about is where the boundaries of that are. Because a leader who essentially offloads their emotional pain onto the people around them, that's not vulnerability. That's just offloading. That's
Yeah.
unhelpful. It's unproductive. It's not useful. But a leader who is able to say, I know that you're scared, and so am I, and then take people into the next step, and
Right.
hold space for their emotion, but also know when it's time to move people on to, okay, so where are we going? What are the next
Yeah.
steps? What's the action we take? So yes to vulnerability, but to the extent that it allows us to build connection with the people around us. It allows them the opportunity to get to know us without using them or using our teams or our clients, or God forbid the media, as an opportunity to just kind of offload our emotional baggage.
Yeah. I think that was extremely well said. And I'm glad to hear it. And here's I have this thing I call the 3 ways to connect with and inspire any audience anywhere anytime. And they're all quotes from people that I respect a lot. And the first one is from a guy named Les Brown. And he says, people don't connect with your successes. They connect with your messes. Your message is in your mess. And I think that's brilliant. And I think that to refine it a little bit more, for me, it's not just about complaining, right? That is not what he means. He doesn't mean just offload your upset on all your employees, right? It's where did you fall down and what did you learn?
And that's exactly the key, I think, is that I absolutely agree. I think the message is in the mess. But what people want is not, oh my God, this is terrible and everything's wrong
Yes.
and this is how I feel. And, blah.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
they want is to know that they want to connect with you on a personal level. So they want to know that you don't understand this theoretically. You know and understand it because you've lived it.
Yes.
But they also want to know, they want the inspiration of knowing that you came through the other side, and
Yes.
therefore you can lead them through it. And I think that's so important, that we don't pretend that everything has always been perfection, everything has always been, absolutely tip top and no problems at all. Because then from a team perspective, how do they know that you've ever experienced what they've experienced? How can you relate to them? How can they trust that you genuinely know how to get them through, or to how to lead them through a difficult situation? But if you can say, I've been where you are, and I understand how you feel, and I can empathize with where you are right now, and this is what I did to get through it. That kind of leadership is so inspiring for people.
Yeah. I've been doing a course, like a webinar for a lot of the large clients that I have. And one of the things that I talk about now, since we brought up that we're in the pandemic, is that I believe this kind of leadership is even more important now than it ever was before, because all of your employees and you, by the way, are a lot more like volunteers now than you ever were before, right? Like, and so what I call this kind of what I call that is the term I'm trying to coin, Sarah, is insightful vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right? Like, be vulnerable and always share an insight. And if you as a leader do that, you open up a space where people can be honest with you about what's going on, which is harder now than it ever was. And it's easier to just not say anything because, hey, we're all on Zoom, and the minute the call's over, you can forget about it. And, so I think that it's really important for leaders to model what they want in return from their employees.
Yeah. And I absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think, I see so many leaders at the moment who are trying to put the brave face on everything. And as I say, I'm not suggesting for one moment that all of our leaders should be wandering around weeping and wailing and, renting of clothes and all the rest of it. Yeah. But acknowledgement, that's what people want. They want acknowledgement, and they want connection more than ever before. I think people crave acknowledgement and connection. And if you can meet them where they are, if you can meet people where they are, and as I said earlier, and also show them that there is a path out of that, then that is extraordinarily powerful. And I've been obviously, with my community and my clients, I did an email out not that long ago, actually, and it probably had the biggest response of any email I have ever sent out to my community. Wow. And this email essentially started with, things are really tough, right? I get it. We're talking about, the potential for a huge global recession, the like of which many of us will never have seen before in our lifetime. Yeah. And you're probably freaking out slightly, right? You're probably worried and nervous and, worried about your job, worried about your business. Are people still going to buy from you? Are people still going to want to be sold to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we paint the picture, and I get that. Right? I'm not immune to it. I am not sitting here in my ivory tower completely inured and insured against any concern or worry. But I want you to know that I have done this before. And this is what I learned last time round. And, and then I shared 4 or 5 insights that I had gathered and learned from my last business, Pagefield, which you referenced at the beginning. Yeah. We started that business in the height of the global recession after the financial crash in 2008. I mean, wow. When everyone around us was like, you cannot be serious. Don't start a business now. Don't leave a really stable job now. Right. So I've done it. I've done it before. And, and I'm doing it again right now. But the ability to actually say to people, I see you. I see where you are. I hear where you are. I can feel what you're feeling. And I can help you because I've done this before and I know how to go through this. is, in my opinion, is the best kind of communication and the best kind of leadership.
Yeah. And what if you haven't done it before and you're a great leader? What do you think then?
Then I don't think you necessarily have to have done it before in order to be able to rally people around a vision.
I
So
think that's a good answer.
yeah, so to say to people, I get where you are right now. I understand how you feel. There are days when I feel that too, but here is my vision for where we're going.
Yeah.
And here is what I see coming. This is what I see for us.
Yeah.
So if you can't take them through, and I mean, for me as a leader, my job is teaching and training and mentoring and coaching. So people expect me to have, step by step, here's the answer. But if I don't have that, then it's okay, this is where we want to get to, right? So you unite around a vision, and then you say, let's work together to work out how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And so you're not necessarily saying, I have all the answers, which is one way of doing it. But what you are saying is, we are a team. We're going to work together to find the answers. And we're going to unite behind this vision.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of leadership, is the ability to get people to unite behind a specific vision. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's a great tack on that. Are there any great leaders that you worked with or that you remember that really stand out in your mind, and maybe any stories that they told you, or things they shared with you?
Funnily enough, so one of the great people that I've worked for, who will not be famous beyond my shores, was a guy named Andrew Brown, who was an advertising guy. And he was very high up at J. Walter Thompson, one of the big advertising agencies.
Yeah.
And I worked in advertising for about 5 years. And every evening so we worked in a small office, and every single evening at about 6:00, he would push his chair back from his desk, pour himself a glass of something nice. Back in the days where people smoked in offices, and obviously everybody in advertising smoked. So he would light up a cigarette, and anyone in the office could go in and sit with him, have a drink, have a cigarette if you smoked, and talk about what was going on. Talk about what was going on in the world, within the business, within culture, within media, within whatever. Ask questions. It was almost like kind of open house.
Yeah.
And I would probably go and sit in his office 2 or 3 times a week at about 6:00 and just have half an hour of, so Andrew, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What should we do about this?
Yeah.
And that openness and his willingness to share his insights and his information and his knowledge and expertise, but also to kind of just shoot the breeze and to be challenged as well. There were definitely times when he said things, I don't agree. This is what I think. And we'd have a proper discussion and a debate. Inspired such loyalty in that team.
Yeah.
The staff turnover in that team was practically zero. Nobody left. Everybody wanted to stay because he inspired this great loyalty just by being open and being prepared to share his incredible knowledge and expertise and insight.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, so it makes me think of something. I'd love your take on this, because what that makes me think of is something that I tell people all the time. And sometimes I think people's, it's really a really big aha moment for people. I say, because of the neurobiology of human communication, I say that small talk has been misnamed. Small talk is not big talk, or small talk is not small talk. It's big talk. And here's why we're confused. Because it doesn't matter what we talk about, as long as it's something that connects us. And as long as the way that we talk about it connects us. But small talk is the opportunity for big connection. And to treat small talk like it's unimportant is to miss what I think is the most important aspect of human communication, which is that emotional connection. And it sounds to me like that's one kind of tributary of that is what he was doing there. You
Yeah,
could go in and talk about anything, but you were talking together, and how you talked about it and how open he was. That all is just going to connect us like crazy.
exactly right. And as you say, human beings are hardwired for connection. Even the most introverted of us,
Yes.
we may choose to recharge our batteries alone, but without human connection, we it's impossible for us to thrive. And our
Yep.
ability to build that connection is entirely based in communication. And I totally agree. I think small talk, I had not thought of it that way, but it is misnamed. If you are able to engage in conversation, to engage in debate and discussion, to share openly your thoughts and feelings and ideas, and you're prepared to be challenged on your own, so that you actually have genuine exchange and conversation happening, that's how we build connection. That's how we get to know one another,
Yeah.
and it's how we inspire loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, and that setting could be a little bit scary for a
Yeah.
leader who's insecure, right? What if somebody comes in and challenges me, or what if, la la la. Um, so I think that it does take trusting yourself, it takes trusting your team, it takes being willing to really be present, as you said, and some emotional intelligence to actually pull something like that off well.
Yeah, yeah, and a willingness to accept what is self-evidently true, which is we cannot possibly know everything or the
Yeah.
answer to every question.
Yeah.
And so if somebody comes in and they challenge us, and maybe they're right, or they ask us a question and we don't know the answer to it, that is not
Mm.
a failing. That is not, some terrible failing of leadership. That
Right.
just makes you human. It is impossible to know everything. So the willingness, and it comes back to the point we were talking about earlier, that the willingness to learn is a mark of great leadership. And that includes learning from the people around you, learning from your team, learning
Yeah.
from everybody, from every level within your organization, within your team. Everyone has something to teach you,
Yeah.
and some lesson, wisdom, insight, experience to impart, even if they themselves don't know it. And that was
Yeah.
one of Andrew's other great skills, was that he was able to just draw you out and draw out your knowledge and your passions and your experience. And all of that meant that, he was, when I was working with him, I was in my 20s. He was probably in his late 50s, early 60s. He was this incredibly knowledgeable man who had huge pockets of knowledge about things, because that's what he'd done his whole career: drawn people out, got them to talk about
Yeah.
their passions, their expertise, their experience,
Yeah.
and learnt as a result.
Yeah. That's fabulous.
Mm.
That's fabulous.
Yeah,
I
people always expect me to talk about politicians, because I started my career in the British Parliament.
uh-huh.
I worked in the British Parliament as a policy advisor and a researcher for a Labour MP.
Uh-huh.
So the equivalent of your Democrats.
Uh-huh.
And so when people talk to me about leadership and they ask me about leadership, they always expect me to talk about politicians, because they know that that's where I started my career.
Yeah.
And when I was in Parliament, let me think. John Major was Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
It was just in the run up to the 1997 general election in the UK, which was the election that New Labour won by a landslide, that brought
Uh-huh.
Tony Blair into number 10,
Right.
who was, and remains a really interesting and very clever communicator. So people, often expect me to talk about politicians. And it always makes me think that, when you picture, if I said to you, close your eyes, not you, because you know this, right? But to other
Mm.
people, close your eyes and imagine a leader, right? Just imagine a leader, not a
Mm-hmm.
specific person, but just when I say the word leader, what comes into your mind? What's the image that is generated? And
Mm-hmm.
nine times out of 10, what the picture in people's head that they associate with the word leader is a white, middle-aged, well-educated man. So usually a chief executive or a senior politician or, the director of a big business, that's what they associate with leadership. And yet some of the greatest leaders I've ever met and worked with haven't been the most senior people within an organization. They've
Yeah.
not been prime ministers or presidents or, senior politicians. They've been much more junior than that, much younger, perhaps not as well educated, but they have the capacity to inspire, to connect, to encourage trust. When there's a crisis, it's them that people look to. When people are uncertain or unsure, they're role modeling confidence and inspiring that confidence in other people. And you can be a leader in your family, in your community, in your friendship group. You don't have to have a specific job title. You don't have to have spent 50 years, working your way up the greasy pole of politics. And some of the worst leaders that I ever met were in fact in politics. They were dreadful, absolutely dreadful. So it's always interesting to me that we always think of leaders as being, the very, very senior people within organizations. And we nearly always think, when we think about a leader, of a white, middle-class, middle-aged, well-educated man. And some of the best leaders don't tick any of those boxes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, I always tell people it doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy. You're a leader. My only question is, are you clear about the fact that you're a leader? And are you leading people in the direction you mean to be leading them in?
Yeah.
And, I do a lot of work with high level, high power female leaders. And I think you do too.
Yeah.
And, it's still a man's world out there in many ways. And I think that one of the big pieces about that is, I almost feel like I'm rehashing something that we should know by now, but it's unconscious bias. There's just, there is this unconscious bias out there that is just super strong and is still there. And of course, anybody in power, man, woman, whatever, who doesn't want their power to be threatened, right? So there's that too. And I think that impacts male and female leaders, the fact that the people above them, want to maintain their position and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an unconsciousness around it for a lot of these really high powered men. And it is, I think it's damaging large companies much more than they have any idea of. The talent that they're shedding and the opportunities they're missing out on because of that unconscious bias towards the tall white man, with nothing wrong with tall white men. I'm not so tall, but I am a white man.
Yeah.
But I think that implicit bias or that unconscious bias is really actually damaging right now.
I agree. And I think, it's not just an unconscious bias.
That's true too.
There are conscious decisions made, policies put in place that discriminate against anyone who doesn't fit that cookie cutter mold of, white, well-educated, middle-class, middle-aged man. And interestingly, I was talking to someone the other day, an executive coach who is working with some of the big financial services firms over here. And she's specifically working with them around helping women to transition back into the workplace after they've had children. And it's one of the hardest things for women to do. Because you may be 6 months, you've got a 6-month-old baby. You are exhausted. You're probably not getting great sleep. You're very concerned about how your child is being taken care of and looked after. And there is a degree of flexibility that is required because, you can't get into the office every day at 7:30 and stay until 9:30 at night when you've got a small baby at home. That's just not possible. And yet
I don't
so
think
many,
anybody should do that, frankly. I
I
mean,
don't think anybody
I'm
should do
wearing
that.
my hashtag sleep more shirt right now.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And yet, so many corporate environments, particularly the big sort of city financial
Yeah.
institutions,
Yeah.
behave as though, turning up for work at a reasonable time, leaving at a reasonable time, family friendly hours, that somehow this is, an abdication of your responsibilities and your
Right.
duties. And
Right.
so these women burn themselves out and, burn the midnight oil when they get home, give up time with their children in order to try and fit into this cookie cutter mold, instead of these organizations recognizing that what happens is these women burn out or they leave.
Yeah.
And they leave in droves because the corporate environment doesn't take into account the needs of women transitioning back into work at
Mm.
this point.
Yeah.
And for men as well, there are so many men that I know who would have loved to have more time with their young children. But it coincided, their children came along at a time that coincided with their career progression, at that sort of steep peak of career progression. And
Yeah.
they didn't feel that it was possible for them to have a bit more flexibility in their work life so they could spend time with their children. We've
Yeah.
got to get past that. We've just got
I
to
mean,
be better than that.
I think that you are talking about some really important, incredibly tragic structural issues
Exactly.
that are having an impact on our society that is tremendously negative.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, I, 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 I totally agree. And it's interesting too, because these firms talk about being interested in results, right? But
Mm.
all the studies show that after working about 8 hours a day, every minute people spend working more than about 38 to 40 hours a week, the vast majority of time after 8 hours is spent fixing problems they
Yeah.
created after 8 hours because they're not sharp anymore. And
Yeah.
if you talk to really truly successful people, Elon Musk may be something of an outlier in this, but most people that are wealthy and successful and happy, I think fulfilled is part of successful. If they're not fulfilled, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
They say that they sleep 8 hours a night, like they protect their sleep because they've got to be sharp to make good decisions so that they can continue to be successful. So
Yeah.
they see getting enough sleep as one of the weapons in their quiver of being successful, or not, weapons, one of the tools in
Yeah.
their quiver of being successful.
And it absolutely is. And yet we have this cult of busyness. We
Mm.
have what I think of as kind of competitive martyrdom. I did a 14-hour shift in the office yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was there for 17 hours. Well, I
Yeah.
haven't seen my family for 6 days. Well, I haven't
Yeah.
seen my family for 4 months.
Yeah.
When did competitive martyrdom become an Olympic sport?
That is the dumbest game to win ever. I used
Exactly.
to play that game and then I almost died. I think I almost died of an autoimmune disease because
Yeah.
I was sleeping like 4 hours a night with my startup and, just going. That's a dumb
Crazy.
game. It's a really
It's
dumb
a
game.
really dumb game, and it's predicated on this kind of sacrifice first type mentality that
Yeah.
the only way to be successful is to work incredibly hard, sacrifice everything else in your life. And that self-care is somehow selfish or frivolous or unimportant. And the
Mm.
absolute opposite is the case. As you say, if you don't take care of your needs, and your needs may include sleep, decent food, proper liquid intake, but also your needs might include getting outside into the fresh air, spending time with your family and friends.
Yeah.
These aren't
Yeah.
nice to have. These are fundamental needs that we have as human beings. And if you don't take care of those needs, if you don't prioritize those needs, you are less happy, you are less productive, you are less efficient, and you're less fulfilled by your work and your life.
Yeah.
And that is the very opposite of success.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I've watched a number of people go through the realization, some very sadly too late,
Mm,
that the reason they were working so hard was to provide for their family that they
yes.
love.
Mm,
And then because they worked so hard to provide for their family that they love, they lost the family they love,
yeah.
to a
Yeah.
divorce or whatever. And
Yeah.
it, you know, yeah, I mean,
It's
which is another thing as a leader that I think can be kind of difficult, because you want to really get the most out of your people. You want people to be super productive. You want everybody to be working really hard. And I don't think either of us are saying don't work really hard. We're
yeah.
not saying
Mm,
that.
mm-hmm.
We're just saying that there has to be other stuff too.
Mm,
And as a leader, I think, to model work hard and then take care of yourself
yeah.
as well, that can be
That's
challenging, but it's so important.
it's I think it's critical that, because they say that a fish rots from the head.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
if there are bad habits at the top of an organization, those are what's being modeled for everybody else, and it becomes part of the culture of that organization. And I once had a colleague who, whenever anybody left the office at, let's say, 5:30 or 6 o'clock, basically if anybody left the office before about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening, he would mutter under his breath, "Slackers." Um, and this was the culture within that
Yeah,
organization, that if you left the office before 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, you were somehow slacking off and not being a productive contributor to the company. I'm like,
yeah,
we've got to get away from this idea that the only way to be successful is to frankly kill yourself
yeah,
working 14 hours, 15 hours, 18 hours a day, because it results in unhappy people, and it doesn't actually create the kind of success that we're looking for.
it's not sustainable.
It's not
I- I-
sustainable at all.
Sarah, I worked at a number of .com companies,
Mm,
and only one of them is still around.
mm,
And that was the one
mm.
where the founders, I was the first employee, and the founders would get up at 5 o'clock
Yeah,
and they would say, okay, everybody, wrap it up, go home, go have a life, see you tomorrow morning. Right.
yeah, yeah,
And what they modeled and what we did as a company was come in
mm,
and turn the crank really hard
yeah,
and really, really focus and just absolutely kick butt all day long. And then at 5 o'clock or so, go home, and
perfect.
that company succeeds,
Yeah.
is still succeeding,
And
and
it's so important for the leaders to do that, because
yeah,
they give permission to
yeah,
everybody else.
yeah,
So, if your boss is sat in their office at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, you don't feel, as a more junior member of the team, you don't feel you can leave. You
how
can't
can you
leave before
leave?
the boss.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if the boss walks through the office at 5:30 and says, "Right, guys, let's go. Time.
yeah,
Turn off your
yep,
computer. Let's get out of here."
yep,
Then you give permission to the people around you to
yep,
prioritize their own needs, their own lives, their
yeah,
families, and everything else in their life that makes up a whole, satisfying and fulfilling life. Work
yeah,
should only be part of life. There
right.
was a line in a film that I watched the other night, terrible film, but there was one line, and it was a French and English film, and no, French and American. And the French guy says to the American woman, the problem with Americans, and I'm sure this is not true, but it illustrates what we're talking about, is that you guys live to work and we work to live. And it's about putting work in its proper place. I love my job. I love what I do. I love my business. I love being of service to my clients. And, without being arrogant, I'm good at what I do. I enjoy it and I get a huge sense of fulfillment from it. But it's not my whole
Yes,
life.
yeah, yep,
It's a part of my life. And we need to get work back into that box of, it's a part of my life. It's not the whole of
yeah,
my life.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and I think part of the reason, you love your job, and part of the reason you love to do what you do, and I think it's the same with me, is because it's not the only thing I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I like mangoes, but if all I ever ate were mangoes, I'd get kind of tired of them
Yeah.
sooner or later,
Yeah. And you learn
So,
this in the advertising world. There's a brilliant book. What's it called? It's called The Perfect Pitch. And I think it's by John, I'm going to say John White, but I could be wrong about the name. Anyway, he's a big advertising guy. He worked for Leo Burnett. He worked for J. Walter Thompson. He worked for some of the big advertising companies in the world. And really successful at pitching ad campaigns. And he talks about the importance of lots of different stimulus, lots of different inputs. As you say, if all you ever eat is mangoes, you get pretty sick of mangoes. But also from a creative perspective, from a learning and development perspective, if all you ever do is go into the office, sit at your desk, work, get up and leave and go home, if there's no time in your life for reading and galleries and film and art and conversation and, spending time with other people, then you're missing a whole load of stimulus, a whole load of input that can really fire your creativity and your ability to think laterally and see different solutions and innovate. And that again is we're missing all of that because, we insist on having people chained to their desks.
Right.
Does that?
Absolutely. I mean, and listen, if you're listening and you're one of those people that is living like that, let me give you a new piece of your job description. I mean, part of your job description is to have some outside stimulus so you can be creative at your job,
Exactly.
Even if that's the only way you can get to it,
Exactly. I used to work in lobbying. I used to be a lobbyist. And obviously I've done a lot of PR and communication. So I've done a lot of creative, coming up with big campaign ideas. And some of the best creative campaigns I've worked on or been involved with have been stimulated by something completely outside of the workspace, or of the specific issue even that we were looking at. A random conversation with a child in a playground, or a book about something completely different.
Yes.
Or going and watching a film, and just one line in the film makes you go, what if we did it this way?
Right. Very good.
So important.
Yeah. That's awesome, Sarah. So now I know that we're at the bottom of the hour and I want to respect your time. Are you good to go
for a little bit?
Okay. So, so on the front of leadership and communication, is there anything else that you've thought of during this conversation or you think is important to just share that you'd like to touch on before we go?
What else would I like to say? Gosh, that is a very open question.
Purposefully so.
It's funny. I've been thinking a lot actually about what I do and the kind of people that I work with.
Yeah.
And I tend to work with purpose-led entrepreneurs, purpose-led business owners, people who are driven not just by the desire to make money, but also to make a difference, to have an impact, to create change. Yeah. And now more than ever, as we've been talking about leadership and communications, the thread that sort of stitches all of that together in a way is inspiration, is the ability to inspire, the capacity to inspire people to follow on a particular vision. And what underpins that is belief. You have to believe that change is possible. You have to believe that you can make a difference. You have to believe that, that progress, that a positive outcome is entirely possible. And I think right now it's, and again, we're talking in 2020, which has to go down as one of the worst years in human history. Just one catastrophe after another. But even particularly right now, bad news sells. So, every single newspaper, every headline, every news bulletin, it's all bad news. And it's very easy to get trapped into a kind of pessimistic, cynical, helpless and hopeless mindset, to think, the world is going to hell in a handbasket and there is nothing we can do about it. And if I could just leave anyone listening to this with one thought. It is, be a beacon of light and positivity and hope. Believe that change is possible, because it absolutely is. Change is the natural order of things. Nothing stays the same. And for me, optimism is a choice, and optimism wins. And when the world is filled with darkness, when the world is filled with naysayers and doom mongers and doom and gloom, when everybody else in the world is shouting down, you can stand out by being the person that whispers up. You can stand out and be a beacon for what is positive and good and optimistic. And that's what people need and crave. They may read the bad headlines, but what they crave is the possibility and the positivity of vision and belief. And if you can do that and you can hold on to that, then genuinely you can lead people in even the most difficult of times.
Yeah. Fabulous. I love it. I love it. I think that that is a great note to end on. I'm gonna just thank you very, very much for being
so
here.
Welcome.
And you're in London, yeah?
I'm in London and in a little place called Deal, which is a little town on the far east coast of the United Kingdom.
Right on. Wow.
So I'm by the sea right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I mean, if you've got to be hunkered down during a pandemic, at least you've got the ocean, right, nearby.
Exactly. I could have been in London, but I chose to be by the sea. Like, if I'm going to be locked down, I want to be locked down within a 30-second walk of the sea.
Yeah, I mean, if you can pull that off, awesome. I
wouldn't it be nice to be locked down on Necker Island, though, John?
That would be an okay place for sure.
That would have been an okay place to get locked down, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It was certainly fun to be there. And, one of the things that I loved about being there, and it was just that every single person on that island was one of those purpose-driven people with a vision. And, it was an amazing experience to be there with everyone and you, who were all up to such big things and so committed. So
I wrote a blog about it.
Yeah.
It's on my website somewhere, but I wrote a blog about the things that I learned on Necker Island. And I said something very similar, which is, one of the great things about every single person that I met there was what I think of as a radical optimist. And they weren't naive. These were not stupid people.
That's important. Yeah.
They were not naive about the problems that we face and the challenges that we face and the difficulties that the world has to deal with right now. But they were absolutely committed to doing something about it, and totally 100% believed that it was possible to turn things around. And I think that belief is so fundamental to being able to really get out there and make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes right back to what you said, don't be naive about your optimism. I mean, look, we may be dealing with this for another year, what we're in the midst of right now in October of 2020, but it will end. And we can come through this better. And it's entirely possible that we could learn lessons that will make life even better later. And, I do think that that's just the worthwhile place to come from.
Totally agree. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative comes from a place of pessimism and doom and cynicism. And how is that helpful or enjoyable?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. Bottom line.
It's just not.
Well, Sara, I'm glad to know that you're in the world. And I really, really appreciate you joining us here today. And I will look forward to having you back on. Now we know what this is like, and let's do it again sometime soon.
Anytime, John. It was so lovely to speak to you again today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming.
No worries.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.